let me go. Let's go. Let's jump over to and I think all these things are directly related. You mentioned North Korea. One of the things that we find here recently that I've been reading a lot, the Russians now are pushing. So there was some UN body that monitored people violating uh, um,
Sanctions
the
against North Korea. Yeah.
the sanctions against North Korea, and that was supposed to be renewed, and the Russians vetoed it. That the Russians are chipping away at the sanctions in North Korea, and I think the Russians are learning something from Iran. One of Iran's power is wisdom. They play chess real well. And they give these guys some missiles and these guys some drones, and I'm pretty sure they're giving it people targeting information, and they really play their allies very well. And I believe that the Russians looking at that are looking at North Korea saying, very, very valuable ally in that region. That being said, we know what happened. Israel attacked the consulate, notwithstanding that's been discussed to a fairly well. How did the Iranians respond? I think they're going to be wise. I don't think they're just going to start throwing missiles at Israel. They're not going to give Israel what they want out of desperate. Israel's desperate. They're trying to draw the U.S. And I think they utilize their allies. I think they provide some far more lethal weapons to their allies. I think that's one of the things you're going to see. Maybe the Iraqi and Syrian and Yemen resistance forces suddenly start to turn it up with some real, as Newland would say, some nasty surprises for the Israelis. Anyway, your thoughts? I think they're going to do it. It's going to be subtle. It's going to be everybody knows I did it, but I didn't do it. Anyway, what do you think?
Well, I think before we talk about the response, we got to actually touch upon why they're responding. Because this attack on the consulate was not part and parcel of business as usual. Israel's been bombing Iranian targets in Syria for a long time now. It's part of their low-grade hybrid war against Iran. And, Iran is responding by, attacking Israeli assets outside of Israel. But this was a major meeting, strategy meeting about the next phase of the conflict with Israel. Understand, Israel's losing. I just want to remind everybody here that Israel is losing this conflict. They haven't defeated Hamas militarily. They definitely haven't defeated Hamas politically. Israel's military is exhausted. They're talking about the need to emergency recruit 20,000 more troops to make up for manning shortfalls. Equipment is battered and torn and worn. And their economy is in tatters. What the Houthi have done has inflicted tens of billions of dollars of damage on the Israeli economy, and the global isolation is wreaking further economic havoc for Israel. So Israel's in a very, very desperate situation, and I think that the Iranians were getting together to talk about how to continue to ratchet up. Because look at who was at this meeting. There's the guy in charge of the whole thing. The Quds force in the region, with extensive experience working with Hezbollah and that aspect of the fight. And understand that if Israel goes to war against Hezbollah, Israel is not going to come out looking too good. But Hezbollah is ready for this conflict. They've been preparing for this conflict. Israel isn't ready. But it wasn't just that. There's the guy responsible for arming the Palestinians. If you saw, I think it was about a week or so ago, the Israelis laid out a whole bunch of weapons that were intercepted, that were coming from Iran. They said, these are the weapons that the Iranians are providing. And I'm sitting there going, wait, we're 6 months into a war where Israel claims to have total control over Gaza and all that. And you've intercepted a very large arms shipment. And you know that if there's one arms shipment being intercepted, there's a bunch of arms shipments that aren't being intercepted. So for all the people out there who are saying, Hamas is going to run out of ammunition. No, they're not. And the reason they're not is the guy that was in that consulate runs a very efficient resupply operation. That shows you how good the Iranians are. So he was there. And so they were talking about how can we get more advanced weapons in? How can we help the Hamas fighters, balance the power. What kind of tactics are they using? What weapons are conducive to that? You don't give them weapons that they can't use. If a weapon requires you to set it up and be exposed to drone coverage, you don't want that. You want the weapon that gives you lethality, mobility, and immediacy of action so that you could draw for survivability. So you're looking at advanced RPGs. They've been studying Israeli armor, Israeli tactics, the weaknesses. They've modified warheads. All that stuff's being factored into these shipments. So they're talking about, how do we do that? They brought in the guy responsible for Yemen, and they're saying, look, we're doing great here. How do we do better? What are the shortfalls? What do we need to give them? How do we support that? And the Iraqis, if you notice, the pro-Iranian Iraqi militias are starting to hit targets in Israel, not just harass American bases, but they're hitting targets in Israel. How do we make that even better? So all these guys are coming in to plan phase 2. Has everybody seen the movie Patton? Great movie. Do you remember there's a scene in there where they've won the North African campaign, and now everybody's come together to talk about going on to Sicily and into Italy. So they have this giant planning meeting. This was the equivalent of that giant planning meeting. This was, how do we take it to the next level? And the Israelis have a very competent intelligence service. They detected this, and they said, they're there. Yes, that's a diplomatically protected building, but we're taking it out anyway, because this is a once-in-a-lifetime shot, guys, to get all these guys who are responsible for causing us all these problems. And so they did, and they got them. That doesn't mean that Iran won't be able to recover, but it's a big loss for the Iranians. And I want to emphasize that, a big, 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 big loss. And the total cumulative value of the loss is greater than the loss of Qasem Soleimani. So Iran has to respond. There's no doubt about that. And there's 2 levels of response. There's the response that's going to do as much harm as possible to Israel. And then there's a response which is the political response that mollifies the hard right wingers in Iran, who are like, okay, they hit us, we got to hit them back. So I think you're going to look at 2 things. One, we're going to see some sort of high visibility strike in the next 24 hours. There's a lot of speculation. The Israelis are evacuating Haifa as we speak. You saw the traffic moving out. They're out of there. I don't know if Iran's going to hit Haifa, because then you create the potential for an escalation ladder.
You remember before they hit some Mossad bases in Iraq,
in Iraq, yeah.
And I tend to think they hit some strategic points somewhere, maybe not necessarily in Israel, and then their allies get further armed. Their allies do some strikes.
I think the Golan Heights is a likely top place where you can hit an Israeli military concentration in the Golan Heights, and they're very vulnerable. You saturate that with missiles, you inflict damage, but it's in Syria, not in Israel.
Right.
But then the next thing you do is all the debates you had about, do we really want to give the Houthi genuine hypersonic capabilities? Is it irresponsible to escalate by giving the Iranian militias, genuine ballistic missile capability? And I think the answer now is yes, hell yes, and double down on yes. And you're going to see they're going to just basically expand the proxy conflict with capability. They're going to double down. They're going to flood weapons in there. They're going to give more lethality to the Houthi, more lethality to these Iraqi militias, and they're going to make not only Israel pay, but they put the United States on notice that we blame you and you're going to pay as well. And so that's, I think, the principal direction will be to continue to use the axis of resistance, as proxy conflict. But I think there has to be a high visibility political response. And I think that a likely target would be Israeli military bases in the Golan Heights, because those are purely Israeli troops, and they will hurt them, but it's not recognized Israeli territory. I know the Israelis say we annexed this, but nobody respects that except, I guess, Donald Trump. But so I think that's the direction we're heading. And I think that the Israelis, when they struck this consulate, understood that they were beginning a process that could lead to escalation, and that there's been communicated to the Iranians that the Israelis understand there will need to be a response, but the response shouldn't be of a nature that forces Israel to compel. So I think that all sides are looking for, just like, if you remember, after we killed Qasem Soleimani, the Iranians said, we got to hit you, and we're going to hit you at outside. But they made phone calls. We got guys into bunkers, and they didn't kill anybody. They just made their point, and we received that message, and we understood. I think the Iranians are going to do the same thing with the Israelis. I don't think they're going to use their frontline weapons. I think that they're going to keep, for instance, their hypersonics in reserve. But they're going to hit them hard with very precision guided missiles with a lot of punch, and they're going to destroy a lot of property. And depending on how well the Israelis can hunker down, they're going to inflict a lot of Israeli casualties, whether or not they kill them or just wound them. Remember, traumatic brain injury was the number one problem after the Al-Assad air base attack. They didn't kill any Americans, but there's over 100 and some odd Americans that had their brains scrambled. And I think you're going to get some Israelis with scrambled brain syndrome after this.
Yeah, I think it's here's the way I see it. And that is, they're going to, all along, the reason to me, the resistance fight groups, or whatever you want to call them, axis of resistance, whatever term you use, I think that one of the major reasons that I would argue they're winning is for this reason: whoever controls the escalation ladder controls controls the conflict. And I think thus far they've controlled the escalation ladder. Israel has punched out trying to turn up the volume and drag the U.S. in, and they've said, nope, there will be an escalation, but not to, you want to escalation to 10. Nope, we're at 1, we're going to escalate to 1.5. We'll escalate to 1.75. We're going to escalate to where we want the escalation. So I think this is going to be about, yes, will there be an escalation? Clearly, but we're going to control the escalation. Therefore, we still control the ultimate outcome. As long as once the escalation spins out of control, then nobody knows what can happen. And I think that it's going to be all about maintaining a view of the long term, understanding from what I'm seeing. There's no way that the U.S. and Israel can maintain this conflict, but so long. Number one, the political issue, we're getting closer and closer to next November. And I think this, as with everything else, will be about the resistance forces controlling the level of escalation.
Look, first of all, let's focus on the last point, which I think is one of the most important points, and but it's woefully neglected in all of the analysis, because we have a whole bunch of people that are applying, traditional, geopolitical analysis algorithms and models to assessing what's going on. I mean, at the beginning, what you call managing the escalation ladder. That's just an adaptation of John Boyd's OODA loop. It's basically the resistance is inside our decision-making cycle. They're acting, we're reacting, and they're controlling it. They're leading us by the nose to the destination they want to get to. But then there's this other reality here. Right now, I just want everybody to understand this. All of your traditional geopolitical models, algorithms, and things of nature, throw them away. They don't matter anymore, because we are in the silly season of American presidential politics, where the only thing that matters in the United States, the only thing that matters, is who's going to cross that finish line in November. And if you're Joe Biden and you want to get across that finish line, all you're thinking about is, what can I do to create a political dynamic within my domestic reality that gets me across that. And whatever I'm doing over there that disrupts that, you don't have American politicians at that level who have the courage of their convictions to say, I'm going to do this, baby, because it's the right thing to do, and I don't care if I don't get across that finish line. We have a handful of people at the House of Representatives who get elected for 2-year terms who suddenly get this kind of courage of conviction because, frankly speaking, they're tired of fighting that fight. Those people, however honorable they are, they would never pass the litmus test of getting to senatorial level. When was the last time a senator resigned on principle?
Never happened.
They resigned because they had an affair. They resigned because they're cocaine addicts. They resigned for a whole bunch of reasons. And then they come up with, I'm resigning on principle. No, you're not. You're resigning because you're an idiot who got caught doing stupid things. I'm resigning for personal reasons. I want to spend more time with my family. Well, if you spent more time with your family instead of snorting coke off the back end of a hooker, maybe you wouldn't have to resign. So no senators resigning on principle because they're unprincipled persons. Every single person that becomes president is the most unprincipled person in America. You can't be a presidential candidate unless you've sold your soul to 426 different devils. And Joe Biden is as corrupt an individual as you're going to meet. And Joe Biden is not going to do the right thing right now. The only thing Joe Biden's going to do is that which garners him more votes in specific battleground states so he can win the election. And so if you're not factoring that as your number one filter, analytical filter, you're going to come up with the wrong conclusion. You're going to come up with the wrong conclusion because there are a lot of things out there that are the right thing to do for the better good that Joe Biden ain't going to do because it's going to cost him votes in the election. And so that's the most important factor. And that's why I'm trying to impart this on. I just wrote 2 back-to-back pieces for Energy Intelligence, and I talked about Ukraine, and I talked about the Gaza conflict. But the point I make in this article is it's all governed by about the silly season. That you have to throw that filter on, and that filter will determine more than anything else the outcome, the policy outcome. So I think you raised a very important point, and I would just ask your audience to, in every problem set that you go forward, right now, whether it's the Middle East, China, Europe, after you go through all the standard iterations of what makes sense and what's logical and all this stuff, throw in what gets Joe Biden across the finish line.
And
that's the only thing that matters. And what stops Donald Trump from going across the finish line?
That's what I was going to say. The other side of it is Donald Trump's over there, and they know he's rubbing his hands together, waiting for anything to go wrong, waiting for you to stumble so he can ram it down your throat. Also, Donald Trump's going to have a pretty tight grip on the Republicans in Congress, and it's going to be very difficult for them to get anything through on behalf of the Biden administration. So the Biden administration, at a time when from one end of this world to the other, their foreign policy has created an acute crisis. They were for some time, these crises were chronic, and now they're acute at a time, the worst possible time for the Biden administration, when politically they don't need them. And the bottom line, I think, what I think we're looking at, particularly between Ukraine and Israel, which one blows first? Because one of them's going to, and I don't mean blow in that it's going to, it may be that it sparks into a broader war or whatever, but I think it may be in the case of Ukraine, collapse, and in the case of Israel, where it just gets to a point where they can't hold this thing up anymore. The Israelis have just, they've gone over the deep end so far in the things that they're doing that the internal pressure, I think it goes from the people in the street to members of the Democratic Party, throughout the party, leaders coming to Joe Biden saying, dude, you're killing us, Smalls, you're killing us. And that it gets to the point where the party says, what I'm getting everywhere is our party's going to collapse. We're going to lose. We'll lose the House. We'll lose the Senate. They'll have a supermajority. We're done. Our whole party is done. Is it worth sacrificing the entire Democratic Party for Israel? You got to make that decision, because that's what you're doing. And I think they're getting to the point where that's a reality. Yeah.
Well, I mean, we're as I said in this article for Energy Intelligence on Israel, I said at the end that, we're in a unique situation. No Israeli prime minister has won an election by walking away from America. And no American president has won an election by walking away from Israel. And yet we're in a situation now that Benjamin Netanyahu's political survival, requires him to walk away from America. And we have an American president, Joe Biden, whose political viability requires him to start walking away from Israel. And so we're in uncharted territory right now when it comes to that. And what's happening here, and the danger here, because we can make a similar case for what's happening with Ukraine. It doesn't matter how many times Joe Biden stands up and talks about the sacred duty and obligation to defend NATO, to defend Europe, and Ukraine will be NATO. Da, 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 da. It ain't going to happen. They lost. It's over. Russia has won. But traditionally, when you have a building in collapse, you send in a shoring team. And I used to do the medium level rescue for collapsed structures. I was on a team that did that. And, so you come in, if there's an earthquake or you have a gas explosion, a building's thing, you got victims in the building, you come in and you shore up the building. You're not rebuilding the building. You're shoring it up to the point where you can, carry out a rescue, keep the situation under control. But imagine trying to shore up the building, which requires all your focus. Meanwhile, you got a divorce proceeding going on where the lawyer's calling you up, and you got to go to court. You got to do this. So you're like, okay, I'm going to go do the divorce. Come back, shoring. You can't do both right. Biden can't manage an election and take care of collapsed buildings in Ukraine and in Israel, and so everything's going to hell in a handbasket. Everything. And you're right. At some point in time, the Democratic Party is going to have to make a decision to let the damn building fall, because it's more important to do this domestic thing over here than it is to save Benjamin Netanyahu, who is not a friend of America, or to save Ukraine, which America has no strategic interest in Ukraine. We have strategic interest in using Ukraine as a tool to hurt Russia. But at this point in time, that tool is dull, it's broken, it's chipped. It's time to throw away the tool. It's time to let Israel collapse. If you want to be in a position where over the course of the next 4 years, you can talk about reconstruction. You want to be in the seat to say, okay, now how do we rebuild? How do we shore up the damage? How do we mitigate problem? But you can't make those decisions if you don't win this election. And you ain't going to win this election if you're focused on trying to do politically unpopular things vis-a-vis Ukraine and Israel. Right now, money is an issue. The southern border is a crisis. It's a real thing. The economy is a crisis. I mean, you can have your Democratic handlers come up and spin the economy every which way you want. But at the end of the day, the American people know. They know what's happened to their paychecks. They know what happens when they go to the grocery store and how much more money they're spending on that. Their bills, their cost of living have gone up 25, 30%. Their paycheck has not grown at all. And we haven't even got into healthcare and what it costs Americans to buy into healthcare and those increasing costs and the decisions they have to make to not to have the insurance. And therefore you live your entire life in fear of somebody getting sick, because that's the end of it, ladies and gentlemen. They get sick. You don't have the money. Your economy, your personal economy is destroyed out the window. And on top of that, you're paying through the nose for student loans you took to get that college education the government said you needed to have to get the big paying job, but there is no big paying job and you're in debt. And that's the reality of America today. That is the reality for the majority of Americans. And if Joe Biden is going to sit there and say, my number one priority is sending money to a cocaine addict in Kiev, most Americans go, no, that's not our number one priority. My number one priority is to send more money to Israel that's committing genocide, and we, to the extent that we can't even veto a Security Council resolution about that, we're going to say, yeah, they're committing genocide. No, there's no more money there. The money needs to come home. And this is becoming a winning argument in the domestic political scene. And the Democratic Party is going to have to make some decisions soon if they want to have any hope of turning this around. Americans, at the end of the day, don't generally vote foreign policy. We can sit there and get all emotional about it and tweet things or X things, whatever we call that, exeats. But we can do all that. But at the end of the day, we vote pocketbooks. James Carville said it right in 1992. It's the economy, stupid. And ultimately, it's going to be the economy. And I think that, and what they've allowed is the southern border to become an economic issue. I mean, when you look, man, I have to tell you, I mean, thank God I'm not on food stamps and I'm not on any sort of social welfare program. But let's say I was. I'm an American citizen who's paid my taxes, and I'm in hard times right now. And the government says, this is what I can offer you. And you're going, wow, I'm borderline poverty here, but okay, thanks. Then you turn around and they got them straight off the bus, popping out into New York City, just throwing the cash at them, or the cards, and all of a sudden you're going, wait a minute. Why do they get literally 3 times more money than I get? And there's no end to this. What? Come on, guys, there's a problem here. There's a problem. The American government is saying they don't care about you, the voter. They care about resolving this political problem here with these keys. And and I'm not a huge domestic conspiracy theorist, but Elon Musk has made some pretty important things. It's not about voting. It's not necessarily that these illegal immigrants cast votes, although in New York City apparently they can. But it's about the political demographics, the census. And when you start flooding people into districts, you pick states to increase populations. The allocation of congressional seats are dependent upon the Senate, the census. And I always read Elon Musk's tweets, and I'm like, conspiracy theory. I don't want to deal with that. No, I was going to say something, get me in trouble, but I'll go ahead and say it. Tower 7. I don't want to talk about it. You guys can do whatever you want. I'm not going to go there. But I'm looking at that more and more, and I go, okay, wait a minute. He's actually got a valid point here. You flood into certain constituencies, and you get the numbers up, the seats get reallocated. And so look where these immigrants are being sent, which means you want the reallocation to these districts in states where you have legislatures that are Democrat friendly, who can reallocate, who can redistrict in a way that guarantees that the new seats are Democratic seats. And now you're talking about the control of the United States Congress. And the United States Congress is supposed to be the people's house. But if the people don't have a say on how this is being shaped up, we got a problem here in America. We got a big problem. Immigration is a huge problem. And I think Americans are going to start to spend more time focusing on that. And Israel just doesn't factor in that situation, and neither does Ukraine. And so I do think that you're going to see some very hard decisions made in the very near future that are not about national security, but about domestic American politics.
And I'll say this, Scott, one of the ways I put it a little bit differently, but in a way I'm saying the same thing. Americans, foreign policy, we're way far away from everyone. So what the elite ruling class have been able to do, what these warmongers have been able to do is go around the world doing all of this crap and not letting the Americans feel it too much. You know what I mean? So they're over here overthrowing country A, they're doing this, a country B, they're doing that, they're assassinating, they're starting wars, proxy wars, you name it. But the American people are scurrying around, going to Disney World, doing the things, watching the game, living their lives. And as long as the Americans don't feel it too much, what's going on? I don't know, something on the other part of the world, whatever. Okay. Whether it's immigration, in that they're in a lot of Venezuelan immigrants, and there's a lot of sanctions against Venezuela to impoverish Venezuela, right? So we go interfere in all of these countries in Latin America, and then our foreign policy shows up on the doorstep of Venezuelans whose country has been destabilized by us, right? Now, it costs money. We talked about this. How much is it costing to maintain that flotilla off the coast of Israel and all of that? And $2 million missiles going against $10,000 drones all day and night. The missiles are coming. This stuff's expensive. So I think then we start printing money to pay for that stuff, which drives up inflation, right? I think what we're seeing is indirectly, this neocon foreign policy, people are starting to feel it at home in the inflation, in the border crisis, etc. So in a way, where it appears that people are angry over domestic policy, it's the domestic policy is hurting as a result of the neocon foreign policy. And the first iteration that we saw of it was Donald Trump, let's face it, whatever you think of Donald Trump, saying, America first and things of that nature. I think a lot of people intuitively felt that means we ain't going to be spending all that money all over the place. We'll spend it here. And I hear it everywhere. I hear it in the Black community. I hear it young people. Hey, why am I spending all this money? Why is all that money going over there when my community or my college loans or my this or that? So I think there is a pushback against foreign policy indirectly, in that people are angry because they're seeing pain at home. I'll put it like this. When it comes to the issue of immigration. People are like, oh, it's all racist. Well, there's a lot of black folks that ain't happy with immigration. Well, you know why? Because they see it as a labor issue. Now you're going to bring in a bunch of people who are going to drive the cost of labor. If I'm a guy who cuts grass, or if I do labor, and you bring in a bunch of other laborers that work cheap, I don't have a job, or you drive the cost of my job, right? So now to that person, well, he's not some kind of a racist. He's got to feed his family, and you're diluting the labor pool. Again, so what do you think about my argument? They're no longer able to stop foreign policy from visiting the everyday lives of the American people, and the American people are pushing back indirectly against foreign policy. Your thoughts?
Look, I support it 100%. I've been saying something similar. I talk about what I call the cocoon of comfort. And as long as the American people wrap themselves in a cocoon of comfort, and as long as the government allows you to be in that little cocoon, rocking back and forth, you don't want to rock the boat. You don't want to change this cocoon of comfort. But when the government starts doing things that disrupts the cocoon, rips it open, and confronts you with harsh, difficult decisions, generally economic in nature, then you start to wake up, and the cocoon of many Americans is being ripped open, and they're coming out. Garland, look at this. The United States Congress, some Republicans are out there saying, hey, on this Ukraine aid thing, why don't we just make it a loan? Okay, well, that's cool. Interest-free loan. So no interest. And it's a loan that we know you're never going to pay back. Wow. And now I'm a guy sitting there going,
yeah.
What? I got a leaky roof. I got a furnace that is hiccuping and doesn't work, so I'm getting cold half the time. I got water heater that needs to be replaced. When I go and try and get a home equity loan, I'm told I can't get it. I don't qualify for it. Or if I do qualify for it, I got to pay this ungodly interest, 29-32% interest that I can't afford to do. But if I don't take the loan, I can't fix my house. And so, wait, you're giving what? You're going to put $60 billion on the table, interest-free loan that doesn't get paid back? Why don't I get that offer? Why can't I go to the bank of Uncle Sam and say, I need, and I don't want billions, dude. I just want $20,000 so I can do the things to keep my house afloat. And it'd be nice to get a 0% loan. That would be great. And one that maybe in 10 years I could say, I don't want to pay it back. And so I'm not going to pay it back. Why don't you offer the American people this deal? But and you say, well, that's not the way it works. Well, it works with the Ukrainians. You're giving them an interest-free loan that they don't have to pay back. It's a gift to Ukrainians. They're not Americans, they're Ukrainians. And I think people are starting to wake up to the fact that something's wrong here. When the government is saying education's so important, education's so important, education's so important, and the people sign up for that, but they go, but we can't afford it. Don't worry, loans. And it's a great loan offer. You don't have to pay interest until after your education. Wow, that means for 4 years I can party and go to school and all that. But suddenly, bam, you hit with it, and you're going, look, not to get too personal here, but we took out around $45,000 in loans to help pay for my daughter's education. We're still paying it back. We have paid the government back over $90,000, and we still owe $20,000 because the interest is just stupid. It accumulates and all that stuff. So we're sitting there going, to send our daughter to college, we took the loan, but the government is just raking in profits. Like, okay, if you're going to loan Ukraine money, they get that loan.
Right.
They get that loan. They get the loan I get. We should pass a law that says you cannot offer terms to foreign entities that are better than the terms you offer to American citizens. It's called the American Equality Act. And so if you want to give 0% loans to Ukrainians, you give 0% loans to the Americans. But if you're going to charge Americans, interest rates based upon their economic viability, Ukraine is the least economic viable state in the world. So if you're going to give them a loan, make them pay the 32 to 40% interest rate that you charge Americans for equivalent loan. And Americans are starting to wake up that when you have a situation where the U.S. government cares more about foreigners than they do about American citizens, we got a problem.
Yeah, I think you're right. And look, all they're going to do when it gets there is steal it. But the big guy will get his 10%, right?
Big
Scott
guy gets
Ritter.
10%.
Yeah, he's good. Big guys got to get paid. That's the problem. And everybody's starting to figure it out. All right, Scott Ritter, thanks a lot. Everybody, don't forget, go to scottritterextra.com. All of Scott's good work is there, scottritterextra.com. And when you go to scottritterextra.com, make sure that you donate. You got to help Scott. Hey, he's got, bills to pay. He's got a family to feed. He's got a dog.
Water heaters need replaced.
Water heaters that need to be, and the government ain't going to do
They're
nothing.
not going to help me out.
No, that's not unless you suddenly decide that you're a Ukrainian Nazi or something. Then they'll just hand you, the money is no object.
I'm starting to identify as a Ukrainian Nazi. I feel it in me because I need the loan.
I never thought
that's
about
a joke,
that.
Everybody. That was a joke, a bad joke, but it was just...
right. Yeah, but that's what we may have to all do. We'll have to all have to identify as Ukrainians, and then money's unlimited. It'll just fall out of the sky on us. At any rate, but that ain't happening now. So go to scottritterextra.com and donate to help Scott continue his good work. Thanks a lot, everybody. Most importantly, share this on all your social media platforms. Peace. We're out.
There is a speed bump on the front. There is a speed bump on the front.